Hey, I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to it and give this video a like.
Podcast also below in the description. Check it out.
Also, check out wineaccess.com/ham. Get you 20% off your first order. One bottle for $15. You can buy a bunch of $1,000 bottles. They got everything in between. Satisfaction is guaranteed.
Yep, 20% off. Wineaccess.com/ham.
Okay, the Niners process, how they arrived at drafting Trey Lance, and who arrived at that decision. I think there's one thing we can say now. After years of watching John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan operate, after seeing picks that we think maybe that's a Kyle guy, maybe that's a John Lynch guy, after seeing the way they talked multiple times in tandem before the draft, right after the draft, SVP that night, and the fact that the only two people that knew who they were drafting the whole time, where their heads were at, were John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. Could Kyle Shanahan have made this decision on his own? Maybe. Is he ultimately the final say guy? Yes. But I think the more I watch them, John, one conclusion I've reached is we should not ever, ever, ever make the mistake of thinking that John Lynch is not the general manager of the team. He's not the final decision maker on personnel, but I do think he's probably more general manager than we thought he might be when he got the job. Face of the franchise, kind of balance Kyle out. Maybe he is all of those things too. But I do think he probably has a lot more sway with Kyle than we initially thought might be the case when it comes to player decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very fair to say. One thing looking back over the last 4 years, I don't know if Kyle could have worked with just I don't mean this in a bad way, but generic personnel guy. Lifetime, just cut his teeth, beat in the bushes, then worked in the office and did pro in college. And I'm even talking like George Patton. Now, I'd say Chris Ballard feels like a pretty high-level guy, but he's had basically, I mean, one full-time coach, and it's Frank Reich, and I think his personality is a little easier to deal with on a daily basis than Kyle. And he dealt with Andy. Like, Chris has been with some pretty easygoing coaches. I think Kyle would run a little more higher strung, a little tighter, a little Belichickian in the sense of just like, I think when he walks in every day, it's not all smiles and hugs. And the reality is Belichick doesn't answer to anybody and hasn't in 20 years. Kyle doesn't necessarily either, but there's no talking down to John. That's where I do think the element of John being an established human in the league, as a player, as just a personality in the NFL sphere, has made this thing work. Now, eventually you have to, like, once you get in the bunker with the guy, this guy has been coaching in the league for 15 years, evaluating the entire league. John kind of comes in cold turkey. Like, you got to prove that you can, and maybe they had some bumps in the road with different players. Kyle, too. I think they both can acknowledge after a couple of years, like, it ain't a perfect fucking deal, right? I wanted Solomon Thomas. He sucked. You wanted C.J. Beathard. He sucked. Like, this is hard. We're in this together. And maybe that kind of grew them closer over the years. Like, they had hits, but they had some misses that were both pretty clear. Like, John banging the table for Solomon, that was his guy. And Ruben, who kind of looking back, like, that doesn't feel Kylie. Disasters. Absolutely, but in two different ways. One guy was just an epic failure as a player, and the other guy got arrested multiple times and had to be escorted out of a team hotel. Like, that's probably the low moment of their tenure, just with a player not on the field, right? And then they just had some bunch of solid picks that maybe they just have kind of grown together. And back to my original point, I don't know if it would have been a marriage and a business partnership that could have grown where it became this offseason with a random personnel guy. That, if you remember, I know you do, but anyone watching, this was going to be a shotgun marriage. And Kyle was like, yeah, I'm not really feeling this. Remember when John called him? And that's how, like, I can't just work with George Payton. I don't know, and just hope it goes well. Or it was weird. And I don't think it would have worked at all looking back. It would have been a tough spot for that guy to come into. And I think George Payton will end up being a good GM in Denver. Caserio, I mean, who knows? I don't think those personalities would have worked. But I think they got lucky, and Jed's got lucky a couple times. Harbaugh was in his backyard. Kyle Shanahan brought a GM to the table. Right?
Yeah. But even Kyle was taking a chance. John was taking a chance. I think probably John hasn't gotten enough credit. Now, to your point, there's no evidence that there's been any battling over picks or anything like that anyway. because I think, you listen to what they said after they drafted Trey Lance. One thing Kyle Shanahan said was, yeah, nobody in our building knew what John and I thought. And it wasn't because necessarily we didn't want them leaking what we thought. It was because we wanted them to be comfortable being convicted in what they believed. We didn't want them to be influenced by us. We wanted to know what our scouts thought about all the quarterbacks we were talking about without just trying to satisfy the two bosses, right? But so, I mean, that's significant. Meaning, like, yes, we will take other people's opinions in. It doesn't have to be that we all agree. I think John kind of has alluded to that, or maybe he said it directly. Why are you smiling?
You imagine something like the lower level scouts walking in that were like, as they went around the room over the month, like pounded the table for Trey Lance, like, you see me, Kyle? Fuck yeah, baby.
The one guy who was like, is it cool? Do you think I should, Kellen Mond is my guy. Should I say that? And the other guy's like,
yeah. Well, that's what his buddy Chris Sims says.
Yeah. I was just going off the Sims big board. But, I think you and I both watched their interviews with Scott Van Pelt, and John told the story of Kyle called him and said, dude, you got to watch this guy. And John said it was a Sunday. They
probably January or February, right? I mean, it's not much going on.
No, show up to work the next
Kyle,
day.
What are you doing?
The first thing I thought was like, was this the end of the season? But I think they've talked like this was after the season. And John showed up the next day, and I said, John, you don't look like you've slept. And he said, I haven't. I've been watching all these Trey Lance cut-ups. So not all former players are good scouts, right? Or good GMs.
No.
John Lynch is kind of unique in that he was an elite level player who, we don't have all of his write-ups here in front of us, but clearly Kyle really, truly, I think we can say definitively, truly values him as a general manager, not as a consultant, not as a guy he bounces some things off of, not as a guy who's there to be the go-between and kind of be a little more relaxed when Kyle gets wound tight. I think now they've also got, Adam Peters, and they've got a real scouting department here that John's in charge of. But I do think clearly John's opinion on this stuff is properly weighted, and we saw it blow up with Jim Harbaugh and Trent Baalke. We've seen it a million times. There are 500 things that play into any partnership.
Here's where I give John.
Do you accentuate each other's strengths and weaknesses? Can you work effectively together?
Which I would just bring up Jim and Trent. It has kind of been a consistent, theme in league history that a lot of people have butted heads in those roles.
And have an expiration date.
Yeah, the pressure, the contention, the difference of opinions.
Well, ego, right? Desire for credit.
And I would say, and I guess money's all relative, but they make more money now than ever, right? I mean, back when we were kids, a coach might be making, an NFL coach, $800,000, a GM maybe a couple $100,000. That's a lot of money back then, but right now it's outrageous. So I don't care who you are, you start making 10, 11, 12 million dollars as a head coach. You go, wait, I'm answering some guy that makes 3 or 4 million, and I'm the boss. That can just go, sideways, right? Put it into normal income terms. One guy makes 100, the other guy makes 500. The guy with 500 isn't just always answering to the guy that makes 100, and that's kind of the equivalent of what's going on. I give John credit with this. When he made his first hire, it was Adam Peters. Adam Peters scouted for New England when they were winning Super Bowls in the 2000s. Then he went to John Elway and was part of their great run with Peyton Manning of building the team. C.J. Anderson, remember when Adam Peters got the job, tweeted, I wouldn't have been a Denver Bronco starting running back on the Super Bowl team without Adam Peters. He played a big role for Elway. And Elway told John, if you wouldn't have had conviction and Adam hadn't been from there, I never would have let him go. Right? Remember that? Part of the quotes. And every time you see John on TV, who's always sitting right next to him, Adam. So part of it is being a former player. John didn't act not just a former player. I mean, it took him 45 years or whatever, but he's a Hall of Fame player now. And he didn't just act like, I know football, I'm a genius, I'm a Stanford guy, I'm the smartest guy in the room. I actually think, which I give John a lot of credit, which we shouldn't. He's just a super high-level guy. Every single person sings his praises, that he admitted what he didn't know right off the bat. And I think for a guy that's already established, I think people that were around Ozzie Newsome when he was young was Ozzie just started from the beginning, right? He's ended playing. Now he was a great player, but like he just started at the bottom and he worked his way up. It was a natural, like he always kind of kept the blue collar. I do think it's a little harder when you've been out of the league for a decade, you got even richer, and you just come in to be like humble. And John always has this humility to him that is just, and part of it I think is a respect of the game. And I get, whenever I hear Mayock talk, they don't feel like they are, like they want to be peers with the other GMs. Like they don't feel like they want to hang out. Like they want to be one of the guys. And that is not something that, I don't think you fake that. You either kind of have it or you don't. And to me, it just gets back to, and this is why I could never have probably been a GM. You have to, I couldn't have, because I don't love football enough. Like deep down, deep in your soul and your core, because your coach is going to be an addict. They just are, especially if you get a good one. Like they are going to eat, breathe, and sleep it. And you can be a little more balanced as a GM, but not much. You have to be able to match it. And I think at the end of the day, deep down, John Lynch is a fucking football junkie. And that Mayock, I think, obviously is too. And that gives you a fighting chance. If you're not, you can't. There's no like, I want to play golf on this Saturday. It's like, it's a shitty grind of a job. But you make a lot of money, but it's a lot of sitting there with a clicker.
But it's a tough balance, right? Because you need to have some of those qualities. But if you're exactly the same as your crazy head coach, you can also run into some problems.
Well, who have gotten, like, I would say, ran out of town? Those GMs, they're like, he just wanted to sit in the office and watch film. That's not really all of the job anymore, right? There's a balance to it.
And I also think
Ballard is a good example. It feels like he balances it perfectly. Of the media element, of the grinding the film element, of just kind of hanging with everyone element. I think he's kind of set the bar of like everyone would want to work for Chris Ballard.
Yeah,
like
I think of the partnerships. Now it's how a guy looks in a Zoom. Like I do not assume Pete Carroll's easy, right? I don't assume that Andy, you've worked with Andy, is easy necessarily in terms of like just laid back, chilling, not like never texting Brett Veach at 2 a.m. sending him some film. I'm sure Brett's got to be on his toes, ready for an Andy text, right? You know better. You know those guys.
Well, the other thing is, Guy, part of football is you win and you lose. So when you lose, it's pretty devastating, right?
I get
there's an ebb and a flow to the year.
What I'm getting at though is like I think what's impressive about Pete and Andy is those are coaches that are number one on the totem pole, who clearly have empowered GMs, right? Like Pete Carroll's number one in Seattle.
Seattle traded.
Andy's number one in Kansas City. But the whole story was Brett Veach wanted Patrick Mahomes. Andy loved him too. But the whole story was the GM, John Schneider, really loved Russell Wilson, right? I think we never talk about it. We don't talk about it much with Bill. My point is, even these coaches that we view as like 1-1-1A top of the totem pole need somebody there with them. I don't want to say to take the pressure off, but somebody who they can trust. And even Bill has Ernie Adams isn't making any picks, right? But Bill does. We think about Bill as like the lone wolf. Bill does have a guy that he trusts implicitly, right?
Yeah.
We just never really see him. Don't really hear about him. Been there for 21 years. Like, you don't work with Bill for 21 years if he doesn't trust you. Like he
was in Cleveland too. I mean, he's a Bill's guy.
I just watched Kyle, and I think Kyle's like you said, very hard on himself. Just an absolute grinder. The photo of him sitting holding the football that you always tweet out against the like equipment little truck or whatever while he's sitting in the locker room. Like Kyle wears it. Like Kyle was stressed out Monday and he already knew who he was picking. And I think John is probably pretty invaluable. Just Kyle's got somebody else right there next to him who can stand shoulder to shoulder with him. And even though Kyle's got the final say, I bet John just can help make him feel comfortable in some stuff. Even though I'm not saying Kyle couldn't do it on his own, but I don't know if anybody really truly does it on their own. And I don't know how you quantify that. And it's one thing to get hired and get paid a lot of money, but I think we saw this with Harbaugh. When it came time for another contract for Jim, then you start having this conversation of like, okay, how much is this guy really worth to us? That's clearly part of what happened with them. And when it came time for extensions, Kyle got his. Like figurehead John Lynch doesn't just get another extension bing like that. Like clearly he's been in the organization for several years and they know his value to the organization.
You know who played that role in New England? His quarterback.
Yeah,
as
Tom.
kind of, just as the guy that just calmed everything down, which is rare. He's a one in a lifer. But I think Tom kind of played the John Lynch, and look what happened. I mean, he's still such a great coach that they're going to compete. They went 7-9, but it's just they lost kind of their calming voice, I think, and that's what John brings to the locker room.
Value of Mahomes, the difficulty of Russ. Clearly, we're seeing in Green Bay. It's not all,
It's hard.
It's hard. Even the ones that are having success, it's hard.
Yeah.